1994 was a really important year in the life of the Sega Genesis. The 32-bit era had begun the year before with the 3DO and Jaguar, with Sega's own entry that generation right around the corner. There were millions of Genesis consoles sold worldwide, and it was important Sega took advantage of that fact with well-received software. In February that year, they had already released Sonic 3. As most of you probably know, it was a development that started with Sonic Team using the SVP chip and intending much of the presentation to be using polygons and in an isometric viewpoint. The initial name of that project was even Sonic 3D. Work on that version of the game reached the prototype stage before the idea was scrapped and restarted. As Sonic 3 progressed, the levels grew larger, and Sonic Team was looking at a massive 34 megabit cartridge with a save battery. There was just no way Sonic Team would meet the original launch date, especially since Sega had prior commitments with its sponsors. Sonic 3 had to make its early 1994 release schedule, and this meant that it had to be split in half and released in two separate titles. That second part of these releases would become known as Sonic & Knuckles, and it landed just 8 months later in October of 1994. It was met with a monster advertising campaign that focused on the ability to lock on to previous Sonic releases. In Sonic 2, it allowed you to play as Knuckles throughout the entire game. In Sonic 3, it furthered that game's story and wrapped up the Death Egg Saga narrative for a complete experience. In this episode, we are going to take a look at it and see where it lands in the overall 16-bit Sonic universe. I hope you guys enjoy my review of Sonic & Knuckles for the Sega Genesis. The story picks up right where Sonic 3 leaves off. The Death Egg has crashed down to Angel Island, and your adventure to find the Master Emerald and stop Dr. Robotnik begins. While there is an entire narrative behind the scenes here, Sonic has never had any real cinematics sharing its deeper story, and you're pretty much left to connect the dots on your own. You get a choice of Sonic or Knuckles to play as by default, and both begin in the Mushroom Hill Zone, though their routes do change a bit as the game opens up. As you'd expect, our two heroes play very similar to one another. Core mechanics of jumping, the spin dash, using rings for life, and running feel very similar. You also get the power-ups that were available in Sonic 3, such as the various shields, water, lightning, and flame. You also get the familiar containers that have extra rings, lives, and invincibility. There are some important differences between Sonic and Knuckles' gameplay, however. While Sonic has a higher jump and is faster, Knuckles has the ability to glide out of a jump. This can be used to bypass large chunks of an area if timed properly, and it can be used as a direct attack against an enemy. Knuckles can also latch onto and climb up walls. You may be wondering how these moves affect him as a choice, and that comes down to being able to access a few areas Sonic cannot. And speaking of areas, just like Sonic 3, each zone is absolutely massive in size. There is a heavy focus on verticality and exploration, mainly because your bonus and special stages require it. If you make it to a checkpoint with 20 rings, you can jump into the Circle of Stars and take part in one of two bonus stages available. These are essentially mini-games where you can score extra items and even extra continues. Special stages are hidden within the levels as giant rings to discover. It's here you'll play Blue Sphere from Sonic 3 in an effort to win a Chaos Emerald. Collect all 7 Chaos Emeralds to earn Super Sonic or Super Knuckles. Finally, Sonic & Knuckles is a single-player only release. Like Sonic 3, Sonic & Knuckles is a very nice looking game. It has that trademark parallax you've come to expect from the series, and the colorful, organic art style. Outside of some changes to the stage themes, the overall quality and animation doesn't stray far from Sonic at all. Sprites look great, and you still get that nice hurry up attitude if you leave the on-screen character idle for too long. I suppose all of that can be viewed as either a good thing or a bad thing depending on your preference. Sonic & Knuckles is the fourth mainline Sonic release on the Genesis in a span of just 3 years, and while there have been changes in the overall look of Sonic, I wouldn't call any of them major. On the surface, this makes sense because the two games are essentially two halves of one story, but the larger view is that this Sonic looks an awful lot like the last one. That really does put me of the opinion that Sonic Team could have done a little more to make this entry stick out more visually. There are a few nice special effects that I was impressed with, but this was another $50 Sega was asking for, and I admit being reluctant to invest that much, viewing it as a continuation of the presentation already present in Sonic 3. All of that aside, you still have to give Yuji Naka and his team all sorts of credit for the art and design here. Mushroom Hill was a great opening area to whet your appetite, and then Eat Zone's personality really stood out in how it was colored and how the backdrops were layered. Fans of Sonic 3 will get more of what they loved, and even if you want it to be wowed by new standout special effects, you still have to appreciate what's on display. Sonic was a great sounding series right from the get-go. I honestly don't think there's a bad track in the entire original 16-bit series, and Sonic & Knuckles continues that trend with another impressive soundtrack. Not everyone is worth bragging about, but you have to love how the FM synth is harnessed here, and given Sega's original touch. I have a few random selections for you, so you can see how you feel about it. For the overall critique of Sonic & Knuckles, I first must tell you a quick story. Back at this game's original release in late 1994, I was sick of Sonic games. I thought the first one was okay, the second one was pretty awesome, and the third was a solid finish to the trilogy. Except it wasn't the finish. Sega had Sonic & Knuckles drop on us that same year, and I was just not feeling it. Added to that was the fact that the 3DO was having a great run on releases, and the Saturn was only a month away. I think a lot of other people felt that same way as well, because both Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles sold retail numbers well below Sonic 2. It took me a while to actually appreciate this for what it is, a well-made platformer with some of the better level design in the series. I'm not blowing smoke up your kilt with that statement either. Sonic & Knuckles has a great feeling to its speed and flow. I found these stages to be enjoyable while running through as fast as I could and exploring them at my own pace. By the time I got to Sky Sanctuary, I was hooked on this as one of my favorite Sonic titles so far. I'd give Sonic 3 the edge overall, but Sonic & Knuckles definitely holds its own. But Sonic Team had meant you to play both these games together. Taking Sonic 3 and locking it on to Sonic & Knuckles gives you a massive game with over a dozen zones and 3 playable characters with different abilities. Yep, you heard that correctly. When together, Sonic 3 and Knuckles allows you to play the entire epic adventure with either Sonic, Tails, or Knuckles. You had multiple endings depending on how you performed with the Chaos Emeralds as well. The truth is, no matter how sick of Sonic I may have been, the product was still top notch. Looking back at it today, I've actually come to really appreciate the growth the series saw over the years while it was being made for the Sega Genesis. And Sonic and Knuckles was a great ending to it all. To add to the value, Sonic and Knuckles also allowed you to lock on to Sonic 2, giving you that game with a playable Knuckles. That lock-on technology was a stroke of genius, and it's a shame Sega didn't find a use for it earlier in the life of the platform. It could have given us extra episodes to some of our favorite games. Sonic and Knuckles brought an end to the Death Egg Saga that was started in Sonic 2, and the gaming media of the day absolutely adored it. No matter what publication you read, no matter what region you lived in, Sonic and Knuckles was met with rave reviews. Sega had released 2 very similar Sonic games in the same year, and it still commanded the respect only the best software received. It sold over 1 million copies, and it's still well regarded by the Sega community today. It was also the last mainline Sonic to appear for the Sega Genesis, and I don't mind telling you, it was a dark time afterwards. The Sonic years during the 32-bit generation was a shell of the greatness we had previously, and it gave way to many 3D entries in the years after. These titles ranged in quality so much, you never knew which Sonic was going to show up. I think one of the biggest problems is, 2-dimensional speed doesn't necessarily translate to 3-dimensional speed. Sega is often hyper-focused on keeping Sonic really fast, and it usually means it's loaded with gameplay that sorta ends up playing itself, with you just tapping a direction or button as it plays out. I think for Sonic to be the best it can be, the series needs to graduate to a style where speed isn't necessarily the defining trait of the gameplay. I'm not saying lose the speed entirely, I'm saying maybe add enough around it where you actually have more to do than simply jetting through stages as fast as you can. We've seen bits and pieces of greatness in some of these 3D Sonic titles. Maybe one day Sega will put it all together and properly recapture the magic that made games like Sonic and Knuckles unforgettable classics. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.